Hey, welcome to this vlog video. This is a little different, something I'm trying. It's not like my other videos because rather than just sitting there and talking and not having some graphics or something to pop up, maybe you could be doing just browsing other pages or uh, opening packages or whatever else you're doing, but you could also hear this video in the background. And maybe I'll have some pictures running, just popping up. Uh, so really don't know yet as I'm making this video. And it's going to be a pretty long video. And the topic of this one is about comic shops and now versus, let's say, the 80s and the 90s, and how I think, if you look at it, comic book shops now have become big chains and big names. They're basically run by people with capital, and they can afford a bunch of employees, and that's how the comic shops are now. See, when I was growing up and back then, the comic shops were basically mom and pop type stores that one person, one family, or one or two people ran the shop. And I think that really does not exist anymore. I think due to the finances and things of that nature, you're really not going to find those type of mom and pop shops anymore. They're pretty much gone. All I see are these big names and big type of store chains that run the comic book industry in terms of where you get your books. The days of the one person running their own store are pretty much extinct. That whole entrepreneurship, really, I don't see it much anymore, if at all, especially by me. See, starting in I'd say the 80s and the early 90s, that's all I saw was, there were a few good shops. I remember that one really cool local guy, and in college, another really cool local store. These stores were run by like one person, or the other store had two people, and then later on the guy left, and the other guy just owned the store himself and ran it. They were like one person operations, and they were like exactly what comic book stores were described as being before, that they were like some dark and dingy shop that there was like a musty smell of old comic books there. You would see rows and rows of old worn out boxes and a bunch of comic books, and they would all be lined up. And the comic books, the new books, would be on a metal rack. It wouldn't be like a rack now where it's just shelves and everything is on the shelf and perfect. Back then, they just put them on the metal racks where things could get bent and things were not perfect, maybe. The store was usually messy to a degree. It was also very much focused on just comic books. It wasn't focused on manga. It wasn't focused on action figures or movies or things like that. It was just comic books, and that was really the main focus. And that's a huge difference from nowadays, where everything is not only comic books, it's multimedia, it's movies, it's anime, it's action figures, it's trade paperbacks, it's books, it's various science fiction stuff. It's all run. That's how comic stores now are run, on the big chain names and what we see today. But back then, on the mom and pop type shops, it was just comic books, really, and there was no real trade paperback market back then. There was no hardcover books really back then. It wasn't a focus of the industry. And since we didn't have the online world, let's say you wanted a Captain America issue or say a Batman issue. Well, since there were no trade paperbacks, And the only way you were going to get that issue that you were missing and want to read the story that you heard about was you had to track down that single issue comic book wherever it was. You couldn't go online because it didn't exist. And as I said, the trade paperbacks were very rare and really not a focus, so you didn't have that option. And if they didn't reprint the option with a second or a third printing, then your only option was to find that issue and track it down. And those old mom and pop type shops, they usually have a whole just section of, you could see the boxes were worn out and everything was not polybagged or with a backing board. It was just put in the box. And that was, I guess that was a whole different time is what I'm talking about in this video. And maybe if you were a comic book fan back then, you know what I'm talking about. The atmosphere was different. And it's just changed. And I guess that's what I want to talk about in this video, how things have changed in the industry. Whether it be for good or bad, I'm not judging it here. I'm just stating it, that it's kind of, in a way, sad that it is a lost form, that the single entrepreneur, the single family, can't really run a comic book shop here financially anymore. I think it's just due to the finances and that the comic book economy overall is down from what it was before the market, that it really is hard, if not impossible, for just a single entrepreneur or a single family to run their own comic book store. I mean, it's a nice idea when you think about it, that a single person could run their own shop, and that is how it was before. But it really isn't now. And now, why is that? Again, I have no idea because I'm not an expert or know any of that stuff, but just my theories is that one of the reasons is that times have changed and the comic prices have changed. That, you know, that theory that the more prices go up, the less people buy. And that, let's say, when prices rise, people are going to either stop buying some books or they're just going to stop altogether. I guess this deserves a little talk about the early 90s. When I was mentioning the comic shops, in the early 90s when the Image Comics hit and Valiant Comics and Wizard Magazine and things at Marvel were really hot, that whole era, suddenly, between the early to mid-90s, a ton of comic book shops popped up. They were probably just people who saw how hot the comic book industry was, and they want to jump on the bandwagon, as they say. And so, in my local area, all of a sudden, another comic book shop popped up, and another one, and another one, and another one. In a short amount of time, of a year or two, a bunch of new stores popped up. I remember reading stories, or hearing about stories, really, about how these stores would be selling out of comics just by the box load, basically, of these, I guess, speculators just buying the stock, not even caring or knowing what was in it. They would just wanted to make a quick buck. And I think the stores then were making hand over hand, dollar over dollar, were making some great sales and a lot of money. Because as the industry makes a lot of money, so will the retail stores make a lot of money. And that was good for especially people who've been there a long time and really invested in their stores. And so you got a bunch of these late-minute people joining the bandwagon. I mean, joining what they saw as a hot trend. Then the mid-90s to late 90s, the comic book market, as you know, crashed. And let's be honest, heck, Marvel Comics, the big name of the industry, they went bankrupt and filed, was it Chapter 11? Imagine that. The comic book, the main industry part, went bankrupt. Maybe people didn't know that or they forgot, but that happened in the late 90s. So something like that's happening, you better believe there's a crisis going on in the retail mom and pop type stores. As all of those stores popped up when the trend was hot, a lot of them just disappeared like flies. Boom, boom, boom. I'm not even. They probably didn't even last 2 years or 3 years. As quick as they appeared, they were gone. And most of them were just the late minute, saw a hot trend, decided to make a store. Maybe they didn't have the passion for it, but they just wanted to capitalize on what was something hot. And then what was left were the mom and pop type stores dealing with the fallout of the industry. And I think that crash and burn that happened in the industry, uh, a lot of those main stores that have been around for years, they just slowly disappeared. I remember that one local store I was talking about that I would go to, run by that one owner. Eventually, he moved stores, and where he moved wasn't as good an area, and it was a smaller store, and it was pretty dilapidated looking. I could probably tell he was just relying on the regular people who bought comics then. He wasn't relying really on new customers. And he made it into probably the early '00 decade, because I moved later on. But by the last few times I saw the shop, I could tell it was just going under, and the store is basically getting smaller and smaller. And by now, I mean, no doubt out of business and probably doing something else, because that shop, I could tell it wasn't going anywhere. But that was probably like one of the last few mom and pop type stores I could remember. And that college one, I have no idea. It's probably gone as well. Because all I see today is not that whole dank and what they call it, dingy comic shop that was run by one person in a dark looking area. You know, that whole description thing, that's gone. Now comic stores are different in that the only stores around really are stores that have the capital, that have the finances and the money to run a store. And these stores are run by a bunch of employees, not just one single person or two. And all of these employees manage the store, and the shelves are really nice, and the books are placed there perfectly. And they sell everything from, as I mentioned, videos, games, action figures, manga, sci-fi, books, and just a whole bunch of other stuff, rather than just comic books. Different times, different industry. And I guess one of the points is that this video was highlighting the differences now versus maybe those who didn't know the differences back then of how comic books and how comic book stores are run. And that it's kind of sad in a way that that whole entrepreneur spirit of just a single person running their own store, it's not really a viable option now. Running a comic store would be a risky business, because the viewership and the readership isn't what it was before. And the way to make money now is you have to really have the capital to invest in other products other than comics. You have to invest in the multimedia, the action figures, and all of those other side things. But just making money on the comic books alone, or American comic books alone, I should say, just really is not much of an option. Because you also need the trade paperbacks, you need the hardcover books, you need a whole bunch of stuff in just to invest in such a store. It's just different now, the whole industry. Things have changed. And I guess another video I should talk about would be comic book pricing. That might be a good topic. So thanks for watching this video. Let me know what you think. It's a little different in format, something new I'm trying. And hopefully it was pretty entertaining. And I guess the topic here was about the comic book stores, about how a single person really can't run a comic book shop nowadays, and how the buying public and what's going on now is just different. It's not better or worse, really. It's just something different in how the industry now is run where you basically need a lot of money and capital to run a shop and a bunch of employees, because that's the new style. And you need multimedia, you need different things outside of comic books to sell as well. So thanks for watching, and talk to you later.